Radio. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate your time. Hope whatever is going on in your life is extremely fascinating. And if not, well, guess what? I'm going to fix for that right now. I, unfortunately, have no way of condensing this information. So we'll just dive in and give it a go. And wherever you would like to jump off, if you're listening, you can, or jump in, you can. Penny Kelly is an extraordinary person. She has been creating all sorts of wonderful new views for people with her experiences. And you might have heard about her or read some of her books. This one I want to talk about today is consciousness and energy. Now that's the jumping off point, okay? Because she has other stuff dealing with elves, extraterrestrials, higher intelligence, Kundalini awakening, astral travel. Okay, now Penny, thank you so much for giving us a how-to guide to really expanding your awareness in the universe and doing it in little bits and pieces so we don't get lost along the way. Hi there.
Well, thank you. Hi. It's good to be here.
The very beginning, I want just to give a brief overview of what got you, what was the catalyst for you becoming aware of your own extrasensory or beyond the body sense of being, your presence. Well, what helped you to uncover that?
I think the bottom line answer there is Kundalini. It was an event that occurred 32 years ago, 33, something like that, years ago. And, it just catapulted my consciousness and my awareness into a universal experience that didn't go away. And it was a long, really difficult journey to learn to manage that, but there's been a lot of gifts along the way. So that was the first thing. There have been, I did not have any teachers at the time. I had no idea what psychic stuff was about, what metaphysics was about, what spirituality was really about. I mean, I had a church, and some history, and education, et cetera. But I really didn't know anything about this whole field. And so it was a really rough time. But Kundalini, it was a full spontaneous awakening, and it was massive, and it repeated again and again over the course of a couple of years. And because I did not have anybody to define what was happening, I ended up looking at it as, from the point of view that I was at and making sense of it as a, full-blooded Western viewpoint kind of woman. So,
like what, psychosis?
Well, in the beginning, I did think I was going insane. That is true. I was terrified of that. But no, nobody said to me, "Oh, that's an out-of-body experience." Nobody said, "Oh, that's a spiritual point of view," or that's, those changes in your breathing, or those changes in, your ability to read people's minds, or et cetera. Those were things that just terrified me. And so I eventually came to grips with that by myself. And because I was an engineer for Chrysler at the time, I eventually took the point of view that, okay, nobody else seems to think I'm, going crazy. So I'll just pretend that I'm normal, and I'll, and in the background, let me do what scientists do. Let me observe and form a hypothesis, and then test it, and then see if it works. See if it helps. And so I learned a lot about. My interest was in consciousness and brain structure and brain function and perception and cognition, intelligence, all that kind of stuff. And so there's not too much that I haven't done now.
Well, and see, that's what's so fascinating about this. I love the fact that, some people, the Kundalini awakening would just totally, okay, now that's my life. I have done this, and I'm going to talk about this forever and ever, and that's the focus. It becomes this very one narrow view. the thing that some people don't realize is that that's just the tip of the iceberg. It expands you, and then you start experiencing all these other dimensions because you have the awareness at that moment that they exist.
That's right. And truly, the entire cosmos was open for me. And, the world of perception had no barriers. The world of experience had no barriers. And so I've continued to research and write about that for years now. And usually the impetus behind writing something is I get curious about something. I'll get in this place where I'll think, everybody's talking about something, blah, 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 whatever it is. Do they really know what they're talking about? Have they really experienced it? Everybody's using the same language. I don't have any of those experiences, and so I will go exploring to get my own experience, and then that's where I learn. And because I have been tested, I do have a very, very wide range of brainwave frequencies that I operate at consciously and with full control, and that opens up the world. At least, I'm going to say probably 2 to 4 times wider than, the average person has at their disposal. And so I go and I look and I watch and I experiment and then I put it all down and say, okay, here's what I've learned. And I integrate it into what seems to be the common perception, and I correct perceptions along the way if I can. Perceptions that don't make sense or that aren't helpful or, that kind of stuff. So. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to note very quickly, the Holy Grail is what we're looking for right now when it comes to tying 2 areas, science and spirituality. And with this book, you give an opportunity to make a connection with something that is very scientifically based, that might bring a little bit more of an analytical, a logical, a methodical, a tangible, a manifest dimension to what we consider spirituality. And that's the work with Dr. Levengood.
Right. Yeah, I think people have, in some ways, they're trying, but a lot of people have given up about ever being able to do it. And so they're barricaded behind this spirituality wall. And then the scientists are barricaded behind their scientific wall. And the work that Dr. Levengood was doing was, to me, so obvious after a while, and even for him. It was, he started out just being a biophysicist and saying, what's going on with those plants? And that just opened the door. And, we started working together along the way. And the more that we worked together, the more science and spirituality came together. So it's been really exciting. I've been so for me, there's this sense of, I see how the world works, and it's a deep seeing how the world works. So, and I've learned a little bit of the language, the scientific language. I'm definitely not a scientist in the traditional sense, but I've always been fascinated by that, and I've always been a how and why kid. How does that work and why? What makes that, tick or happen? And so that has been a big focus for me in this whole work that I've been doing for the last 30-some years.
And I don't know if you're doing the how and why. I'm doing the what if.
I do some of that too.
It's like, what if?
Good for you.
What if? And then the world opens and shows you, well, try this. Yeah. And there's never an ending to the try this. I'm like, oh, and your life is full before you know it.
Yes, it is.
Okay, now Dr. Levengood has done the work with crop circles, and he was the first one to really take on this phenomenon and try and give it some kind of credence and really look beyond the perspective that, and I think some of it is almost a protection kind of thing. If you say it doesn't exist and it isn't real and you get enough people to believe that, then you've dodged a bullet. Okay, because when you don't have answers at the highest level, then the first thing you want to do is go, oh, crowd control, mass hysteria, put the cap on right now and go in the corner and put the hat on and plug your ears. Well,
Right.
Most people were doing that and buying the line that there's nothing to this. And he was willing to put himself out there and say, well, you know what? I got this one.
Mhm.
And that's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. When he first saw, it was his wife who said to him, hey, Lefty, his nickname is Lefty, come on down here and take a look at this. He watched just a little piece of a program on TV, and it was featuring crop circles. This was back in the late 80s. And, his only thought was, it was all about plants, and they didn't say one thing about what was happening with the plants scientifically. And so he was not really interested because he's a man of science from the inside out. He has never been interested in the hoopla and the drama and the controversies of what's going on. His entire set of skills and expertise has been in the lab and with science and math. And so that's how he experiences the world. It's been really interesting to work with him. And so he, after the second year, this I think was a program on unsolved mysteries, he wrote to somebody and said, what's happening with the plants? Has anybody looked at the plants? And no one had. Obviously, it's like, well, something's going on with the plants. Yeah. Why would they all lay down in a circle, or why would they have that design? What's happening with the plants? And I think that's a symptom of how human-centered we are instead of world-centered we are. We think that, we immediately started saying, well, who did this? Instead of asking what's going on with the plants. And so he got some samples from a couple different crop circles and started investigating, and it cost him a lot. It cost him his entire reputation, which was a fabulous reputation. He has had 6 major full-length articles in Science magazine, which is a premier scientific magazine. And yet he's been trashed left and right because he was willing to get involved in something that was seen as non-credible. And what he began to see was that there were some things that could not be explained by human behavior. They had to be explained by something else. And he didn't have answers, and he just kept investigating. And eventually investigated something like 300 and some crop circles. Most of them, almost all of them, I think there were only a couple that were not what are considered to be real. And, I forget what the 2 guys' names with the board.
Dave and Bob or something like that.
Yeah, Dave and Bob or Tom and Bob, whatever it was.
Yeah.
The phenomena that he was seeing in the plants at the cellular level could not have been created by Bob and Tom and their board. And so,
but it was worth a shot.
Yeah.
You're going to get a whole lot of attention if you claim that you did all that, the glory. Yeah, we did it.
Right.
Yeah. How'd you do it? And how did you manage that work schedule you had? How did you manage the time delay and the jet lag? Incredible.
That's
yeah.
so true.
But there was enough to make the headline. It's an amazing thing about being in the media, because I've been there. Once you do a news story and you get the wrong word out first, that's what most people hear. They do not see the correction. And it's on the 6th page of the Kansas City Star that this was the wrong headline. Oops, owie. Well, that's the only paper they saw that week. And guess what? For the rest of history, that person has the mental impact of the wrong headline.
That's right.
Happens all the time.
Yeah, well, he does not read newspapers. Lefty, Dr. Levengood, does not read newspapers, and he does not really watch TV, and he didn't listen to the radio. His entire life was just very different. He would be in bed at 7 o'clock in the evening. He would get up at 2 a.m., and he would begin work in the lab. He eats 1 meal a day. He has eaten the same thing for 50 years. A bowl of salad and a bowl of spaghetti. Period.
Wow.
That's it.
Wow. Very regimented and just very, in terms of, being human, focused.
Right. Yeah. He
focused.
said He doesn't like religion much at all. He has no use for religion, but he has this deep appreciation for consciousness and spirituality, and the presence of certain forces that are very alive and aware. And so I think he made a deal early on. He only mentioned this one time, and the deal was something like, I will focus on science, you don't bother me about food. And that was the deal.
Get your priorities straight.
Right, yeah. And he's
you have yours and I have mine.
Yep, yeah. He's very fragile now. He's about 87 or 88 maybe. Still pretty darn sharp, but still eating the same thing. That's his meal. And he cooks for himself once every 10 days, period. And that's all he's eaten for the last 50, 60 years.
Wow. Well, okay, if we were going to do the carbon chain there, the little thing that they do, the carbon footprint and all that, he's kept it very light.
Yeah, he has. Yeah.
All right, so
and
brilliant.
It certainly blows all those arguments about vegetarianism and special diets and high nutrition right out of the water. It's about energy. And he understands that, I think, more than anybody on the planet maybe at this point. It's about the right consciousness managing the right energy.
In the very beginning of the book, you talk about this, and it's right before the prologue with this little poem. And you're talking about if you change the consciousness, you can change the entire reality system.
Right.
And so if you're thinking about, you're listening to this, and you're thinking about reading this book, or at least doing the overview or whatever, remember, it's a lot to do with our own values, our own belief systems, our own abilities to shift what we consider to be normal and abnormal, and allow that we really don't know until we explore, experience, and engage this other way of seeing life, whomever it happens to be with you around. If you try on something for a few days just to see what somebody else is experiencing, you may be blown away, because more of those things might happen to you that you hadn't ever given thought to, or even, the idea that you could experience that for yourself. And being around people like Penny Kelly and obviously Dr. Levengood, there are things that can happen as a result, because it stimulates you or me in a way that we have not been exposed to before. And that's the beauty of consciousness. So getting into the book with, you put this on hold. You kind of made an agreement to work with him, and then it was backburnered for, how'd that happen?
Well, there were so many things happening in my life, and so much change, and I was already overworked, underpaid, underloved, all those complaints that people have.
Yeah.
But I continued, to stay in almost continuous communication with him. We still shared, etc. I just didn't think that I had the scientific background to be able to talk about what he was doing and communicate that in a way that made sense. And finally, after using that as my excuse, he said to me, "I'll teach you." And so I said, "Okay, all right." We set up a weekly conference, a weekly meeting, and that happened. I think that started in 2003, 2002 or 3, somewhere in there. And we spent every week about 2 to 4 hours together, in which he would explain what he was doing in scientific language, and then I would ask 10 million questions, and I would ask the same questions again and again. It took a long time for it to soak in. We recorded the entire conversation. I have thousands of pages of transcriptions of our conversations, and it was a very slow, steady, and excellent education into biophysics. And what began to happen after a while was that I began to see parallels. He would explain something, and it would trigger in me the memory of something that I had observed. For instance, I have seen all kinds of things at the atomic level, just an amazing assortment of things. We won't go into that, but I began to say to him, well, that reminds me of when I'm in this state of mind or this level of consciousness, then I see this and I see this repeatedly, and this happens, and this is what I have made of that or decided about that. And we began to share back and forth what I was observing, what he was researching, what he was observing in the lab, and I began to then say, why don't we try this? And so after a while, I became really almost the director of the experiments going on. He still would do all the work, all the scientific work, but I would explain what I thought was worth checking into. He would then research that. He would write it up. We would talk about it, maybe endlessly in some cases. And then, he'd have his data, and then I would assess it and say, if that's true, and this is repeatable, then we can draw these conclusions. And then he would, contribute to that, and so we wrote a couple papers together that were published, and so that's how we began working together. I learned the language and the methods of biophysics and astrophysics, and he learned the methods of consciousness and energy.
Okay. So, now, you come up with a word called CDP.
Right.
This is fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other thing, too, is before we get into that, I'm going to jump ahead. Chapter 11, Marilyn and Joyce. I have pictures in my yard of what this phenomena is, and it's incredible. The orb does not describe it, but I have 3 successive pictures, one taken by my partner, Andy, who had a different camera, and then the other 2 pictures. No, I'm sorry, they were on the same camera, but they were in sequence, but we both had switched roles, and we were both getting that image of this beautiful, it's all a multicolored kind of, and sometimes it'll be an oval shape or an elongated, not rectangle, but a blob. And it has the colors that go from the outside. That's like a yellow, or there's a rim on the outside, and then there may be some cohesive circles within that border area. But greens, yellows, reds, little blues, and they're all in this formation around the trees. And I was told before we moved here, the guides, my own go-to, that there were fairies, and this place was a sacred space. Native Americans had the property before, so that would go along with it. But when I started encountering this and getting pictures, I had nowhere to go. And then I read the book. I was like, oh, yes, there's something here that tells me what else is happening. It's so it's like I'm saying, to anybody who's listening, these connections that we have with people, sometimes we get the information when we least expect it and in ways that we don't ask for when we're ready to know more. And it just happens. So you've got the CDP. What is that?
It stands for charge density pulses. It actually, now we use the term charge density plasmas, but we started out with charge density pulses. Lefty had his, on the laboratory bench, he had a chart recorder, and he was doing some experiments with some plants, and he would hook up the plants to the chart recorder, and then he would turn on a supply of electricity, and then he would turn on the chart recorder, and then he would record whether there was any activity coming from the plant spurred by the battery that he had it hooked up to, which was the electrical system. And he was looking to see if there was communication or a genetic activity within the root systems of plants. And one day he turned on the chart recorder first, and then he turned on as soon as he turned on the chart recorder, he had the plants already hooked up to it. And here comes this very robust, signal. And the chart recorder starts to show that there's this tremendous amount of activity coming. And the odd thing about it was that it was a negative charge moving toward a negative pole, which was just not normal. Usually opposites attract, negatives or positives repulse one another. And so he just looked at that and thought, what the heck? What's going on? And then he realized that he hadn't turned on the battery. And so it was like, oh, I forgot to turn on the power for this experiment. And then he stopped and said, but if I haven't turned on the power, what is that signal and where is that coming from? And eventually he began to classify that. He reads prodigiously still. And he was studying charged spin density waves. And what he saw was that there was a charge coming off of these plants and that it was similar in some ways to this thing called a spin density wave. And so he began to call it a charge density pulse because it was a pulse. And that's how CDP came to be. And in the beginning...
Hold on. We got to take a break here. And this is excellent. It just gets better after this. So if you're listening, stick around. Talking with Penny Kelly. And the focus this time is on consciousness and energy. I'm Wendy Garrett. You're listening to Conscious Living on Empower Radio. That's again, Penny Kelly. What we're trying to do is really make a bridge here between science and spirituality, and it has to do with consciousness. In the book, we were just talking about the CDP, and before we got to that chapter, or when we get to that chapter that I was talking about, that I mentioned about Marilyn and Joyce, there was a little thing here where Lefty had somebody who told him that this guy, Charlie Plyer, could read signals coming from the earth, and that the earth, he deduced from that, has a consciousness that affects everybody else. And everything here has a consciousness, and that we are all waving in and out of being. We aren't as material as we seem. And I wanted to bring that about because when we started doing the show, both Penny and I were hearing this phase in, phase out kind of thing. And I started drinking tea to kind of ground my energy and pull it back in, and realized, oh, this is the part of the book that addresses that. Does that make sense, Penny?
Yes.
That's why I turned there. Oh, okay.
We're much more dynamic and much more fluid beings than we have ever envisioned. And, the charge density, the charge density plasmas that we are constructed of are simply in communication and in a dynamic interaction and change, very fluid changing motion at all times. And I think one of the things that bears pointing out and maybe underlining is that we in the lab, were able to document again and again that those charge density plasmas are directly, they respond directly to consciousness. And we worked with that over and over and over. And it began to be very obvious and apparent that this was a new form of energy, that people, plants, animals, the earth, everything was made of these charge density plasmas, that they were communicating all the time at all levels, and that includes the earth. And I think the thing that I mentioned in the book was that Charlie Plyer was doing his own version of CDP research using the earth, and at the time of the Columbine shooting, it picked up all of the consciousness that was going on in Columbine at that time. His signals, what you see with CDP is that most people just hum along, most plants, animals just hum along, but when something really big happens, that gets communicated through the consciousness all the way around the planet almost immediately. And the signals of that CDP immediately show that. And that was an amazing piece to to me. It was like, oh my God, we have a way of tracking not only individual consciousness, because we did some experiments with me in the lab and with other people. And, it was over and over again. We could do those at will. And then we also had the mass consciousness events of Columbine and the London bombings and Obama's inauguration and things like that.
And the Super Bowl touchdown. It's not all negative.
Yes.
Like,
right. We were able to document or pinpoint the moment of the winning Super Bowl touchdown because everybody's consciousness just got very, very excited. And it was, for me, it was, those experiments and that documentation was like the final frosting on a whole bunch of other research that indicated that this was how we were communicating, and the language behind that, the CDP, which is the charge density pulses, and the solitons, which is another scientific term for a standing wave that does not interfere with other waves. They coexist together, which at the physical level is something really, it's really amazing, because most waves either have constructive or destructive interference. And so it's the whole book was just this mystery of trying to, started with the crop circles, trying to figure out, what was causing this. And eventually, we did explain, Lefty, came up with the theory that said this is how crop circles are formed. This is what's happening. These are the dynamics, et cetera, et cetera. And I personally was looking in one of his math books. In higher math, what you learn is how to describe a pattern using numbers. And, in some of these higher math books, you can get these numerical equations that then describe a pattern, and they would show the equation and show the pattern. And I'm looking at the pattern going, that looks like a crop circle design. And it was a big aha for me to realize that, that there was some kind of really wonderful scientific, mathematical mystery unfolding in the fields. That was, I was really amazed by the correlations between the two, between science and what we would call the unexplained.
Well, and it's also, for me, it's like an unanticipated or unexpected type of result. Everybody wants this to be something like, okay, this means that the ET folks that are in the big ships above us are down here doing this, to kind of tweak or pique our interest. And it's like a billboard for other ETs going by. Oh yeah, they got that one. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, what is his theory?
Well, he won't say, excuse me, he won't say what or who might actually be triggering the crop circle. But I took the information and said, okay, Lefty, if you don't want to say, I'm going to say, at least put some theories out there for people to work with and to chew on and be aware of. It is possible that consciousness, especially higher order consciousness that comes from those beings, Lefty calls them those people who are more highly developed than the human beings.
That's a nice way of putting it. Uh-huh.
Yeah, right. They are very capable of creating a crop circle using consciousness. However, so are you and me and, an animal or a tree or the earth itself. All of those have consciousness. And this gets into a theory that I put forth in the book that I have worked with for 30 years now, and it continues to hold water. It continues to be, I've refined it a little bit, but it continues to work, that there's and I won't go into the whole thing, but that consciousness and energy are two sides of one coin. And I think, people have just thought of consciousness, if they listen to scientists, consciousness is just something that's attached to the brain or comes out of the brain. But consciousness is the feeling aspect of energy. And energy is the movement capacity of consciousness. So if energy is the movement capacity of consciousness, then the more developed the consciousness is, the more powerful the motions and the intricacies of all of the, the movements of energy will be. And that energy is what literally starts spinning. To create a crop circle, you have to have a double rotating a set of counter-rotating vortices, they're called, and those will begin to then interact. And it's in the interaction between those two vortices that the crop circle actually gets formed. And as you come to realize that consciousness is the other side of the energy coin, what you begin to see is that, there are beings out there, there are places, there are realms, and I've been to a lot of them actually, where consciousness is used very differently. And it is the form of energy that is most attended to. I guess I could say that. I'm not sure what we're all doing with our consciousness here. I think, mostly we've been hypnotized. But
we're working out the kinks, okay?
That's it.
Working out the kinks. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's an experiment in a lot of ways, in my view, is learning what works and what doesn't, and how you can take it to a higher level. And
that's right.
Basically elevate your light or your essence into a more fluid and constructive form. And when you see that, you get results without planning or intending. It just happens.
That's right.
And it's I don't know, it's an amazing thing, because a lot of this stuff that when you have these experiences happens, there's no word. There's no definition. There's no way of describing it. There's just saying, you got to try this for yourself. Because when it happens, your reality shifts.
And it shifts permanently. That was one of the things that we discovered, was that energy and the pattern within a human being, for instance, that pattern routes the flow of energy through that human body. And every single human body has a different pattern, an energy imprint, and it operates at various levels. If you jump that, and you can jump that pattern into the next, what we call the next higher order of function and arrangement, the particles rearrange themselves, and therefore energy flows differently. The goal of a human being, or anything, a plant, etc., is to be able to route energy more efficiently, more powerfully. And when we do that, we say we've had, quote, a Kundalini experience. That's what Kundalini is. That's what a spiritual moment is, or a peak moment, or, one of those. You'll see them described in all different sorts of ways. But what they are is a moment where the energy shifts, and the pattern of particles within the human being, the plasmas, reroute energy differently, and you have access to a different perception and a different kind of feeling and a different kind of power. And that is sometimes strong enough to change you permanently, which it did me, many years ago. But a lot of people have had a little taste of that. And once they have that, they never forget it. They never can really say with all honesty, no, I don't believe in such and such. I mean, they can say it, but it wouldn't be the truth.
Yeah. Well, and when you learn about energy, then you can read others. You have that sense. And reading doesn't mean looking at them. It means there's a sensation, an intuitive knowing, an engagement that goes on, and you are in that other person's field in a way that you feel that response. Does that make sense?
That's a key thing, Wendy. You said it right there. You have a sensation that goes with it. It's a feeling state. Energy is a feeling state. That's all there is to it. That's the bottom line. And so as you change your feeling states, you are utilizing energy in different ways. And if you don't experience a wide range of feeling, then you don't usually have a wide range of consciousness. And you don't also have very much power. and I'm using power here, not the power to make other people do what you say or to, rule the world or that kind of thing, but the power to create in a way that's in alignment with your own purpose, your own reason for being. So,
and it's extraordinary, that kind of awareness and awakening, when you're around people like that and who operate from that level, can give you a boost, a jump start. You still have to do your own work. That's the whole piece of this. That's why we are in this little human shape. There's some homework that we are supposed to do, and each person is responsible for his own piece. Nobody else can make it or break it. It's yours. And you just, and the cool thing about that is, from my experience, there's no failing. It may look like that to others, but they don't know what came with you and what your purpose was. And sometimes you're here to be a thorn for somebody else.
You're here to teach.
And that's like, oh, okay, whoops. And you just, before you get, start judging other people and saying, well, so-and-so should have done that and that. It's amazing because one little catalyst can change an entire system just by being in the right place at the right time, and to force consciousness to say, that's not a good idea. We need to change.
That's right. Yes. And you made a comment in there about getting people, some people have extra energy and they can impact the energy of other people, other systems is the way I see it, the way I think about it. And in the book, that was one of the things that really piqued Dr. Levengood's interest. He was, for years, the victim or experiencing a non-working or very poorly working gallbladder. And one of the women that was he eventually got invited into this group of people who were, described themselves as abductees. And he began to work with one of the women, and one day she noticed that he just looked terrible. And he said every single morning of his life, he got up out of bed and he had to hang on to something for a few minutes because of this incredible nausea and this feeling of dizziness and sometimes even a blackout. And he would push through the day whether he felt well or not. And she noticed that he looked, as she put it, very gray. And so she gave him a treatment, and he was like, yeah. Oh, yeah. He was just feeling so crappy that day that he said, it can't hurt. And
he opened himself to the possibility, yeah.
That's right. And when he didn't have any more nausea, and that was such an amazing change for him, he said, wow, there's something here that we need to be looking at. We scientists have our heads in the sand. And that was a major epiphany for him. He did require, I think he said, a total of 3 of her energy treatments, and she had the power to rearrange his plasmas and direct the energy moving through them, and the result was that he never had the problem again.
Now, I don't know if this is a meme or a little thing going around that's true or not, because it's hard on the internet to dissect some of this, but there was a little bit that caught my attention that said Tesla was able to cure Mark Twain. Mark Twain had an issue similar to that, a stomach issue, or I can't remember what it was, but he used an energy current to help give him that kind of relief. And so he was a fan after that. And I don't know, again, some of this stuff is hard to track down, but it's interesting the correlation between these two stories was that, and there's other insinuations that Tesla had information through non-conventional methods. And it's just those kinds of implications that when you see results kind of make it easy to do the math and add up the results. Okay, this isn't something we had access to or awareness about. Something is happening here, and it's a trend. It's a pattern, as you say.
Yes, it is. And I think the overall pattern, if you look at big picture, points of view, or look from a big picture point of view, is that we are, as a civilization, evolving. And this actually, right now we're talking about Consciousness and Energy Volume 2, but I'm working on Consciousness and Energy Volume 3 right now. And, it's very clear to me that we are moving as a group toward an evolutionary doorway, and we need to step through that door. We need to not goof it up again. We're having a lot of help, and I'm really excited. And I think actually this month is a turning point.
Thank you. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think that we are coming to a point where a lot of things are going to reach a peak, I think, over this winter, and yet the clarity that has to be there to make decisions in terms of consciousness, that clarity is it's right at our fingertips, and I'm so excited about that.
Now, I read somewhere that the Maya, one of the interpretations is that there is a portal that will be available, open, accessible the end of this year, and it just basically shifts us into higher consciousness. Now, for my own information, my own guidance, it's an amazing thing. It says, what they've told me is, we can't put this into words because you have no language to make this tangible or concrete. So what we're going to say is, it will be a completely different transition into a reality you have not in this manifest state experienced. So there's no way to describe it. But when that happens, it will just be like the butterfly, the caterpillar, to give us some kind of analogy, and you will be here. Right.
Remember in the back of the book, of Volume 2, I mentioned the experiment, I think it was about fish and frogs or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I look at what's happening right now, the Mayan calendar, I think, really is an ancient piece of mathematics that records this periodic wave coming through the entire galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy. And if you know anything about light imprints information on all the energy systems that it touches. And, and so in the book, I talk about this experiment with fish eggs where they shined frog eggs, shined a light through frog eggs and onto the fish eggs, and instead of getting fish, they got frogs because they were imprinting a new kind of information. The cells just picked up that new information. I think the same thing is happening in our galaxy. I think there is a wave of light. It is supposed to reach its peak at the end of this year, December, January, 2012, 2013. It will be at its peak. As it's coming through the galaxy, I think it's imprinting us with all the information from all of the planets within our own galaxy that are, that have other information for us. And I think that our friendly ETs, our friendly other people who live on, in, and around the planet, are trying to help to make sure that there's a certain amount of information that gets imprinted on our consciousness so that we can make that leap. And we'll do just like the frogs or the fish.
Just go right into it. Yeah. Well, depending on which is which.
Right.
Two things. I got a mathematical equation, and then this morning I got awakened. Here was the equation. 3, 7, so it's 37, 5, 7, 57, 7, 9, 79, and 1, 13. And they told me to do the math. I'm like, oh, lovely. Okay, this is the stuff I get. The other thing was this morning, as I was waking up, I heard this wonderful flute sound, and I'm half awake, mostly asleep. And behind the flute sound was this chord, like a trombone playing loud. I'm thinking, whoa, that's enough to vibrate the entire house. I thought, that's a wonderful way for the ETs to wake us up. I was not thinking. This is just what came out. And then I realized that's like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Yeah. And I'm already aware of the programming in the John Denver music and things like that, little tweaks, little things that are so subtle that we don't put it together consciously until we're ready to hear and accept that might be something else going on here. And the last thing was, we aren't prepared, but we're ready. Now, isn't that cool?
Yeah. Well, I have an answer to that we aren't prepared thing. I get a lot of phone calls from people saying, I'm afraid, what's happening? And I've said, you know what? We need to be prepared to work together. We're ready, but we're not working together yet. That's the piece that has to happen. And I think that that's the change that will be happening this month. We are going to get it and realize the days of bootstrapping ourselves one at a time is over. We have to do it together. So.
Well, and this thinking is changing that. This thing that I'm seeing is that more people are on the same wavelength, and that's changing the external reality in ways that we have yet to be able to do the math on.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I think everybody's really busy looking at the old system and saying, is it going to fall apart? And some are hoping it does, and some are hoping it doesn't. But the fact of the matter is, we need to be focusing on building the new and really staying involved in that and consciously saying, well, we know what works because we know what doesn't work. Let's try this.
Okay, we're going to have to wrap up. This is just the tip of the iceberg with Penny Kelly. If you want to find out more about her work and her thoughts and her beliefs, of course, there's going to be the next book, Volume 3. But before that, go back and read The Robes or The Elves of Lily Hill Farm, and you'll get an idea that this Kundalini awakening was absolutely an awesome opening. But it doesn't have to just happen through Kundalini. Mine happened with an introduction to a higher consciousness that still affects the nightlights, which is electricity. And when he does the math on that little thing, that how can this come on when I didn't turn it on? The battery wasn't there. It was the way that it was arranged. It takes advantage of, it's an opportunistic type thing, and it makes energy work without us knowing how.
Right.
Or making it. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. But that, so those things we are all going through right now. And you sharing your message gives people permission to say, I own this. I'm normal. Isn't that neat?
Yes.
So you are normal, but really cool normal. How's that?
Well, thank you. I think you are too.
Normal plus. Thank you so much for talking with me. I look forward to talking with you again about the next book and maybe more in between, just because there's so much going on now. But keep doing your work. You are a gift. I appreciate you very much. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for having me on.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.